Hello, my name is Keith Nolan, private cadet, and the topic today is deaf in the military. And how many of you here have thought about joining the military? I see hands going up. Me too. And ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to join the military. That's always been a desire of mine. I love reading about military history, and also my family was in the military. My uncle and my grandfather were in World War II. And I've always wanted to serve my country. But can I? No. I can't. For the simple reason that I am deaf. But that didn't matter. I still had that desire deep down inside. I wanted to join the military. For example, after I graduated high school, 3 months before September 11th happened, I went into a naval recruiting center. And I went in with the hopes of joining the Navy. And there was a big man standing there. But it was impossible to read his lips. I said, "I'm sorry, I'm deaf." Tore off a piece of paper and he wrote 3 words. Bad ear, disqual. He didn't even write out bad ear, disqualify. He didn't even finish the word, just disqual. All right. And I went around to other places and they all said the same thing. You're deaf, sorry, you can't. And that's the response I heard from every single one of them. So I shifted focus and I became a teacher. I taught the deaf, and I had been teaching for almost 2 years. And that spring, 3 things happened. The first one is that I was teaching history, and we were talking about the Mexican-American War. The bell rang, class was over, and I sat down. And one of the students approached me, the student was deaf, and asked about joining the military. My response was, "Sorry, you can't, you're deaf." And then I stopped for a minute. And that's all I had heard. And now I'm telling my students the same thing? That just didn't sit right with me, and it had a really big impact on me. The second thing was one of my friends recently had moved to Israel. Did you know that deaf people are allowed in the Israeli army? Come on, how can deaf people be allowed in the army? How is that fair? What's going on? So last summer I went to Israel, and I interviewed 10 deaf Israeli soldiers, and I videotaped them, and I interviewed them and had questions, but we'll get to that later. The second thing was here at CSUN, my alma mater, they had recently set up an Army ROTC program. ROTC is Reserve Officer Training Camp. And what that means is while you're pursuing your college degree, at the same time, you can also be in a military program. That way when you graduate, you're ready to join the military. You can go in the Army. And that's what the ROTC program does. It's pretty interesting. I had already had a career in teaching, but I sent off an email to the director of the program, and I explained my situation. I'm deaf. Is it possible if I could take a few classes with you? Share what I learned with my students. And this was the first time the response wasn't the automatic, "No, you're deaf." It was, "Well, we'll see. Think about it. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe you could take a few classes with us." And I was shocked. And I was already a teacher, but I would grab any opportunity I could to be a part of the military or any of that. And all my life, I talked about people and their military experiences. I'm very well read on military history. And I wrote a research paper called Deaf in the Military. A 98-page long research paper about deaf in the military. Did you know that Americans had deaf people that served in the military? There was a key man, Deaf Smith, Private Cadet Smith, in the Texas Independence War. And Gallaudet has a left of deaf Americans who fought in the Civil War for both the North and the South, and they were deaf. The third example is World War II. There are just a few examples of that there. Some deaf people were in World War II, and they served our country. The war itself doesn't matter. What's important is that we've had deaf people in the military before. And these are the deaf Israeli soldiers. And they weren't in combative roles. They weren't on the front lines with the artillery and the fire. But they were behind the scenes in supportive roles. And they had a litany of jobs they could do. Intelligence, computer technology, drawings, supplies, training the military canines. And how did the deaf Israeli soldiers and the Israeli soldiers communicate? They used lip reading, gesturing, and they learned how to sign paper and pen. Technologies, computers, emails, the same thing. There's no magic wand to make communication accessible for everybody. And they had interpreting for training. They had interpreters for training camps, but that was all. But they didn't work with interpreters every day. The Israeli army has small groups, and so each group learns how to communicate with each other. So there's no need for interpreters. They learn how to work together. And these are the soldiers I met. This is when I was in Israel. And part of my research also focused on people with disabilities in the military. You can get hurt and become disabled. One example is Captain Lance. He had hurt his leg and he was in physical therapy now. And he was in Iraq. He was in Afghanistan. He was hurt and now he's back in Afghanistan. And he wasn't the only person. There were a few other soldiers, a few other amputees that still continued to fight and to serve. They also had blind soldiers in Iraq. A car bomb went off and he lost his sight. But he didn't leave the army. He's still in the army. He's still on active duty. And also on the front line, they had a soldier who was deaf. He's in Iraq, and he developed a hearing problem. And we have a deaf soldier in Iraq right now. So I was shocked, but how do you explain this? If the military can employ disabled soldiers, why can't they have deaf soldiers? Why not? How is that fair? And also 80% of the workers that work are non-combative roles. And deaf people can do maintenance, they can do mechanics. There are a litany of jobs that they can do that are not combative that deaf people can still accomplish well. In Israel, the other point was Israel accepts deaf soldiers in the military. And 80% of jobs in the military are non-combative roles. So I ask you, can deaf Americans serve our country? And the answer is yes, a resounding yes. Without a doubt. Now I will tell you about my experience in the Army ORTC program. This fall, I'm still in it now. My class, this was the first time they had a deaf person. They had never had a deaf person in their class before. So of course, it was awkward. It's a new beginning. And there was a big list of things I can't do. How can you communicate? So of course, the natural response is fear. They'd never worked with a deaf person before. It's all right. And I wanted to be in the Army. So I had to learn a whole new world. I had to learn all the military nomenclature. I had to learn everything, all things military. So we started off slow. We got to learn each other, how to communicate, and how to work together. One example in particular, the first day of class, I didn't have a uniform. I was just in civilian clothing. Everyone else was in uniform. And every morning at 3:30 in the morning, we had exercise. We had physical therapy. We had training every morning. Field training in the mornings. And we also had Army practices as well. We had to learn. So I had to show up at 5:30 every morning in my regular clothes without a uniform. We all had to work out. And I was told, you don't have to. You don't have to do the exercises. So I thought, all right. But I still came every morning for field training, even without my uniform. And they said, no, you don't have to do it. But I really wanted to. All right, go ahead. And they observed me for a while, which was fine. Showed up Friday. And the teacher taught us all the drills, how to pay attention, how to salute, all the proper techniques. And I was in the back watching everybody, but the teacher said, no, come up here, be a part of everyone. I figured it was better to be behind everybody so I could see what was going on, so I could follow orders. But the officer who opened the door for me, the one that responded to my email, noticed me and said, nope, come on, the front line. You want to be in the military? You learn how to be in the military. You don't follow other people, you learn for yourself. That's what you have to do. And that had a really big impact on me. Treated me like everybody else. So 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, no uniform. I asked if I could have a uniform, and they said no. All right, but I stuck with it. And then one day, they said they were going to give me a uniform, and I was just so excited. They said, you're motivated, you show up on time, you give 110%, you give all of your effort, and they decided to give me a uniform. And so I went to the military, I went to the military warehouse thinking that I would get just the uniform. But they gave me all of the gear, the helmet, the shovel, everything. And I was just so happy. Now I have to tell you, every morning I got up, put on my uniform, and I feel official. It's an honor, it's a respect to wear this uniform. So every day I kept going. In the Army, we also had Army training as well. We also had to figure out how to use an interpreter. And so that also added to it as well. And we had Army basic training. They had a big helicopter, so we were going to have to learn how to deal with a helicopter. And all the soldiers got in the helicopter, all suited up and ready to go. And the officer didn't think that I should go, that he didn't think that I should join the helicopter, because I couldn't hear the orders to follow out. And that was all right. So everyone else filed in, and I just stood there. But the officers were talking, and at the last minute they said, all right, get in the helicopter, go in. And I ran and I joined in as fast as I could. And we learned, in my group, we learned about each other, how to support each other, how to communicate with each other. There was no barriers, no separation. We worked it out. And I love them. They're like my brothers. This is a picture of someone that I serve with. This is the name of my class. This is Cadre. And they supported me. We all learned about each other. And we're all a cadet. So when you work with them, you sweat with them. They're your comrades. They're your brothers. We're just like a family. We practice together. We learn the theories of war, how to lead a mission, how to do recon, how to do bombs. We learned all about military strategies. It was hard to find an interpreter who was willing to get up with me every single morning, but this is my interpreter. This was my interpreter before class started. And it was awkward for training and for practice. But that's Lieutenant Colonel Phillips. He's the head of the whole program. And when I see him, I always just feel proud. He's the embodiment of a soldier, and I have a lot of respect for him. And he never looked at me like I was deaf, like I was different than anybody. He just always treated me as a person, and I have a lot of respect for him. This is our group. This is that helicopter that I was able to join in last minute. And every cadet has a mentor. This is my mentor. And they teach you everything you need to know. They show you the ropes. And this is when we went to Las Vegas to see the Army, their program. We learned how to shoot. We learned how to do all the different things. And I passed my test. You can see my medal right here. This is another person that was important, and another fellow boss, and he didn't take any gruff off of us and taught us what to do. And these are other cadets. We're all in the same group. We're all equal. We've been together a long time. We're always very, very sarcastic with each other and teased each other. You can see the scar. He has a scar, and this is very obvious from his injuries. This is the staff. This is the high staff. They've also worked with President Obama. And they came to watch us. And I got to meet them, and it's a pleasure to meet you. And the interpreter voiced for me. But the man looked at the interpreter and shook his hand. And the interpreter was no, and showed that it was actually me. And he didn't know that I was deaf. And this is the cadets. These are the people that I worked with. And then 2 weeks later, the ROTC has 4 levels. I've completed 2 now, the basic. I completed 2 levels this past fall. And for the 3rd level, you must pass the medical exam. I can't because I'm deaf. I'll fail the hearing test. I will. And they told me that if you want to continue to level 3, you can't do the physical exercises. Friday practice, you can't come to the Friday field training. You can't do it. So I can take the classes, and that's all. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow. My officers, my brothers, they all had the same thought. Why can't he continue on? So right now, they're trying to work with the top dogs to see if there's a way that, even though I can't pass the hearing test, if there's a way that I can still go. And they keep saying policies. The policy says no. The policies are as stands. And my officers are trying to find a way to have a deaf cadet to see if I can keep going. But all I keep hearing is that I can't because I'm deaf, even though I've completed the lower tiers of the ROTC. But my fellow officers keep encouraging me to keep going. You know the policies, but talk with Congress. Keep going. Fight this fight. So, we'll see what happens, but I need your help. I need your support. We all need to stand together. Because before this fight, the black weren't allowed in the military. Women weren't allowed in the military. Now they are. So policies are changing, and I hope one day they will.